So let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Jo Stone. She opened her counseling practice here in Sedona in 1990, and she served as our community in this area for the past 25 years as a past president of Make-A-Wish Foundation. She's also currently on the board of the North Arizona Restorative Justice Program, and she also serves on the board of the Sedona Film Festival. So she's a longtime member of this community. And I believe Richard is your husband. Am I correct in that?
We're no longer married, but we're very good friends.
Okay, so I'll say he's a significant other in your life. So let me tell you a little bit about Richard Carmen. Dr. Richard Carmen founded the first full-time speech and hearing center here in northern Arizona, where he practiced for 17 years. He also served as an adjunct professor at NAU, which I believe stands for Northern Arizona University. He was a former president and vice president of the Sedona chapter for the American Cancer Society. He consulted at the Flagstaff Hospital's audiology department, and he was a board member of the Sedona Arts Festival for their first 5 years. After 4 decades of his own personal silence on his involvement in the UFO field, he has finally decided to publish his first book on the subject, which there are cards for right here. And this event today is his book launch party. So we don't have this book here, but it's out on Amazon, and this is our official launch party. So you guys are present for that. And this is his first opportunity to really come forward and share with you his own personal experience. And I am particularly honored because when someone has a professional career as a doctor, as you know, Lynn Katai did, and she had to come forward, she was motivated to come forward to stand in her integrity. And the same is true with Richard Carmen. So it brings me, huge honor and humility and respect. And please share the same with me for Dr. for Dr. Richard Carmen as he comes forward to share his own personal experiences.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. May it be a blessing for you and for everyone. I will also just briefly mention we will go to the Szechuan Chinese restaurant. So if you want to speak with Joe later, we'll go as a group. Those who want to, you buy dinner on your own, and Joe will be available. Dr. Richard will be available to talk in more detail. So thank you, and I'm here. If anything goes wrong, I'm right here with Valerie, and we'll make it work.
Great. Jennifer, thank you so much for our invitation here. And thank you, audience. And I also want to thank MUFON for the opportunity for us to present. Joe will present first on the dissertation she did back in the late 1980s.
1980s. Finished my doctorate in 1990. So this is older research, but it's still valid because at the time that I was conducting my research, there was very little published on anything about UFOs. The average person couldn't really go out and find anything. So originally, when it came to deciding on my dissertation topic, I had thought I was going to do a study on test fighter pilots and addiction to their own adrenaline. And fortunately, the way the class worked for your dissertation topic was alphabetical. And since my last name was Stone, I was on the last day. Every other person was doing something on addiction. And so I had decided that, wow, I'm not sure I want to compete with that. My practice at the time, and I had been in practice in California for about 10 years, was made up of youth at risk and professional women as a balance that, just needed to come in at times for tune-ups. And one of my professional women came in very, very upset, and she said, I'm going crazy. I'm having well, they don't feel like dreams because I think, you know, I feel paralyzed and I don't believe in UFOs, but this is what's happening. And she was describing visitation. And then shortly thereafter, I met Rich. And on one of our first dates, he took me out to Topanga Canyon and said, do you want to see some saucers? And I said, sure. I mean, from the time I was a little kid, I never believed that we were the only intelligent life form in the universe, and I certainly hope not. So I began to have sightings with him in Topanga, in Palm Springs. And so I decided, all right, this is a phenomenon that's occurring. It hasn't been studied. I mean, there were a lot of people out there that were doing research, but not with a significant number of subjects. And so I went before the committee in my class, and they laughed at me. And I kept challenging, which is not my personality, but I did in this case. And so the professor finally said, well, nobody here is going to stand on your committee for this. So you have to find one person with the university, and then you have to go out and find 2 PhDs that will stand on your committee. So I went out and I found 2 PhDs who would stand on my committee. One was Leo Sprinkle, who sadly is not with us any longer. He was a wonderful, wonderful psychologist who was very involved in early UFO research. And David Jacobs, who is still with us. And I finally found a professor at my school who authored chaos theory. So he was the one that said, well, okay, you know, I don't know if I believe in this, but, you know, I put forth chaos theory, so you know, I'll do this for you. So I got passed, and it was the first study done, psychological study done with a statistically significant number of subjects. You know, the results were consistent with people like Dr. Jacobs, Dr. Druffel, Dr. Parnell, and Dr. Sprinkle, but they had what we would call anecdotal research because it was fewer people. I initially interviewed 60 people. These people didn't know each other. You know, a lot of them were reluctant to come forward, but I was making some contacts. I eventually reduced with criteria. I don't know if any of you are familiar with doing doctoral research, but they make you put a lot of criteria in so that you can control the variables. And so I was down to 23 people, and I had 2 groups. The first group had verified periods of missing time that were over 20 minutes. In other words, they were someplace, they were expected someplace else. Most of them, it was way over 20 minutes. It would be hours. And, you know, they had called to say, I'm leaving and I will be home in whatever amount of time it was, and they weren't. The second group had either UFO-related dreams or experiences that they couldn't differentiate from reality. Again, most of them were not believers. You know, they thought that there was something wrong with them, that they were going crazy.
Group A?
That's Group A. Group A is the verified periods of missing time. Group B is recollection. So subjects that weren't included, I administered an MMPI, which is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which at the time was the gold standard of personality inventories if you're looking for pathology. And I was looking to rule out pathology. I excluded people with a high level of dysfunction, not because I didn't necessarily believe their experiences or feel that their trauma, wasn't important. It just would have been difficult to control variables, and with some people I made the decision that they were too fragile to go through an MMPI, to go through filling out a very, very extensive social inventory and to undergo hypnosis. The type of hypnosis that I used was not in any way suggestive. I interviewed people. I only used words that they gave me so that eliminated any kind of suggestive process on my part. So the results would be phenomenologically analyzed by myself, an independent psychiatrist, and another psychologist. I was the hypnotist. So Group A, again, had periods of missing time but no conscious recall. And as you can see on your screen, they tended to have impulsive behaviors, overeating, mostly overworking, smoking, not full-blown panic attacks, but they tended towards panic. There was alcoholism in their family or some sort of addiction in their family. And in Group B, can you throw that up, Rich? Thank you. There was some depression, some feeling of helplessness, loneliness. Sometimes there were physical complaints, which is, increased symptomatology. And you can imagine that if you had recollections of this kind and felt, you were paralyzed in your bedroom, you would feel pretty helpless. So the MMPI has validity scores. Though there are 3 scores. The L score is to measure if anybody is lying. The F scale is, are they trying to conceal psychopathology? And the K scale, the F scale is exaggeration, and the K scale is concealing psychopathology. Nobody registered high. They all registered within the normal range on those. And none of the subjects in either group revealed any high levels of hypochondriasis, depression, hysteria, psychopathic deviance, paranoia, schizophrenia, which is OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, schizophrenia, hypomania, and everybody was within normal ranges. I mean, we all have a little bit of pathology, and that's normal. One of the interesting things was that all of the group had 50% higher suicidal ideation, not attempts, but ideation compared to the normal public. And again, if you have these recollections, or if you've repressed these recollections, it makes sense. All of the subjects, whether they were included in the study or not, were offered additional therapy sessions to I didn't feel like I could do, anything else. So there was a small group within this group, and they were only 5%. And their experiences were very loving. They described light beings, unlike others who described the grays or other type species that that were non-compassionate. Let's put it that way. I mean, certain people felt tortured because they weren't in control. They weren't consented to any procedures that they underwent. But this group with the light beings, which is very much like what Richard is going to talk to you about, they experienced a great deal of love. I mean, yes, it's very ego-dystonic because it's not something that, you know, we come across in our daily lives. And so even to someone that experiences a loving experience, it's great. But a lot of the people that experienced that also were shown the Earth's future, which was very catastrophic. For, you know, in many instances, but on the whole, they came away with a greater sense of spirituality and a greater hope, despite the fact that, you know, they had seen much of this. On the whole, the people with recollection felt like there was no safe space. Again, very understandable if you feel like you're having experiences that you can't control. So overall, people were disturbed, traumatized, reluctant to talk. I was, you know, very, very careful about, you know, not publishing anybody's names or descriptions, and I hold that to this day. So there, like I said before, there wasn't much published. Bud Hopkins had one book out, and Whitley Strieber had just released another book. Most of the people that I encountered hadn't read either one. A few of them had read Bud's book. Whitley's came out about halfway through my working with subjects. So. And then I was asked in 1992 to present all of my findings at MIT with it was a worldwide conference on ufology. They didn't coin UPA then, it was still UFO. So that was in September 13th through the 17th at MIT, and this was the book that was published afterwards with everybody's research, and it was, you know, it was a fascinating experience. It was closed to the press.
Even I couldn't go.
Yeah, even he couldn't go, right. And John Mack and Dave Pritchard really were the ones that put this all together. So I was very honored to be asked, and actually quite intimidated to speak. But very grateful that you know, my research was felt valuable enough to be included in this. So those are kind of my results, and I will.
Well, any questions that you might have, raise your hand and
yes.
We'll call on you.
I have two.
Okay.
Number one, how did you collect your subjects?
So I was in touch with MUFON, but they're through various clinics that I had affiliation with. You know, I spoke to people, and I was given names that way.
And number two, thank you. Number two, your state of mind prior to going into these interviews with these people, and your state of mind after the interviews, was there a difference? I mean, how did that shift your?
I mean, like I said earlier, I had always believed in, you know, that we couldn't be the only intelligent life. But I mean, listening to people's stories, especially the people that were traumatized, yeah, it's, you know, it was very difficult, and you know, I had to take time for myself in between with some of these stories. You're welcome. Yes?
What years did these people have these experiences?
Well, my study took 2 years to do, so I was doing this study between 85 and 87.
But when were their experiences?
Their experiences, some of them started in childhood, and you know, some of the people that had recall, some of the people that didn't have recall and I did hypnosis with, their experiences also started in childhood and were periodically ongoing.
I was just wondering if you interviewed people from the same families.
No, I specifically did not do that because then there would have been a lot of conversation and support of each other's stories, and I wanted very independent, as clean a subject as I could find. Yes.
Has there been a follow-up with any of these people, or is there another larger scale subsequent study?
I haven't done that. There are some subsequent studies out there that you can Google.
Who would be the author that I could look at?
You know what? On the MUFON site, there are articles, and I'm not coming up with authors off the top of my head. After I did this study and we moved here, I was, you know, opening my practice, and in those days in Arizona, anybody could hang up a shingle and call themselves anything they wanted. There was no licensing here, so I was very concerned with being mainstream. And you know, I would get calls periodically to see people. There were a lot of individuals here that were grabbing hold of our visitors and telling them that they had had these experiences, or that they had implants, or and basically scaring them. And so my friends would call me and say, gee, we had house guests, and you know, now this one's very upset, and can you talk to them? But I didn't pursue seeing people after that.
And
Yes.
yeah, thank you, Joe. Hi, I'm
Hi.
Melinda Leslie. Hi there.
Hi.
First off, in answer to that gentleman's question, you said MUFON, exact. MUFON ERT team, experiencer response team, and they have a number of papers and stuff. And
Thank you.
when Kathleen Martin was the last director of it, she did a whole study and wrote about it. So I recommend looking at the work of Kathleen Martin answering that gentleman's question. And Yvonne Smith and CIRO, Close Encounter Resource Organization, and she's written 3 books now at least on the subject. But as far as written up stuff, but the last one to do a formal study that I'm aware of it would be Kathleen Martin and MUFON. There you go. And then separately, so that's I wanted to finish up the answer to him. But I uniquely researched the covert human involvement stuff, what are called MILABs technically, or traditionally. And that's people who've had abductions, then have harassment, surveillance, follow-up stuff at the hands of covert human agencies, and have had stuff with abductions with the covert humans involved. So I wanted to ask you if you've had cases of that. I worked with, briefly, but with Dr. Mack, and at one time he had shared with me about 14 cases of it that he had clearly, and one of those I've become good friends with him. He's a well-known case of his that you probably well know too. So anyways, there you go. I just wanted to ask you if that had come up in your research and kind of what percentages, et cetera. Oh, another study that just came to mind that's worth looking at is oh God, I'm forgetting their name. They wrote the giant book, Ray and those guys. what was the name of the organization? Remind me. What? Free. Thank you. I'm just pulling a blank. Thank you, dear. You're hired. Okay. The Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into extraterrestrial encounters. I mean, tongue-tied. They wrote a great big book. That's probably the last major study. Now they think about it, that would be the last major study. And everyone with an interest in it, I highly recommend checking that out. They have incredible percentages that they've done and a study free in the free organization. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, FREE stands for Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Experience and Extraordinary Experience. They first was extraterrestrial, and then they reassessed the name and came up with extraordinary. So I also will comment, Dr. John Mack, after this very, very famous conference at MIT, was Harvard University, where he taught and was a psychiatrist, attempted to fire him. That he had tenure at the university, and they attempted to take away his tenure and fire him. Right. And God bless Danny Sheehan, stepped up, defended him, and it became a big thing in the news in the 90s. And it's also what helped push disclosure to the point where we are today. So if any of you don't know about that, it's really a fundamental part of our UFO disclosure history. And you can Google Dr. John Mack and learn about it. But it's such an important part of history to know that that Dr. Joe Stone was really critical right at that critical point in time. So I know you probably want to move forward, but do you want to take another question or two or comment on your work?
Well, I want to comment.
Yeah. Please do. And your mic isn't working, so you got to use that one.
So Joe's study was the first phenomenological study ever done. It had never been done. No one had ever done this. So I was very proud of her. I was disappointed that I couldn't attend this closed session because these were the cream of the crop. John Mack and all the notables, there were authors, scientists. It was really an incredible collection of material in this book.
You're welcome. This is my only copy, but you're welcome to take a look. I mean, we had scientists from Brazil, just from all over the world that attended this, and had done some very interesting work.
As you know, the title of the only book I've written really on this tremendous spiritual event is called The Voice. There are many people who have heard a voice, a spiritual voice that has guided them. Mediums hear voices. That's how they get the information. Often it's under impressions, but they also hear a voice. I want to tell you about Margie, a friend of Joe's and mine, after we moved to Sedona. After we moved to Sedona, her mother had passed, and she was out at the cemetery all alone, weeping. The relationship was really tight, and she really missed her. And suddenly she hears a voice, and it's only 3 words. It's a male voice, and she hears, "It'll be okay." That voice, those words transformed her. It transformed grief into acceptance. Another friend of Joe's and mine, Gary, who we knew back in the 1990s, after I had shared a little bit of my story, told me that he was in his truck, and I believe it was either the late 60s, maybe sometime in the 1970s, here in Sedona, traveling on 179. Now, the road was not what you see today. It was a rougher road. And he's going about 55, 60 miles an hour, and he hears a male voice screaming to him. He's alone in the truck, and it's saying, "Pull over, pull over." He slams on his brakes, pulls off the road, just as a tandem timber lorry carrying these huge pine trunks from Flagstaff, double trailer, had lost its load. And the timber was flying all over the street, came around the corner along where he had just parked his truck and just missed him. Could have been killed, if not for the voice. Those are 2 examples. There are many examples. When I was putting this presentation together, and one of the people in advertising met me, he said, I got to tell you, I've heard the voice. What did you hear? And he sent me information, lines from what he had written down as I had written down, and as though I was taking dictation. He did the same thing. And by the way the sentences are structured, I said, you heard the voice. It sent chills through me. So what I'm going to ultimately share with you, where it might appear that I'm the only one who hears this voice, I believe this voice is worldwide, and that there are millions of people just like me who have heard this voice and just like me can't talk about it. Because you hear a voice, you're going to be seeing a psychologist, right? So while some people, a couple of people have said, well, why are you so special? You hear the voice. I'm not special. It's happening all over the world. Something is happening all over the world in big changes. If you look at the planet itself, you can see big changes are happening, right? So what I want to do is, I want to kind of like build the story here for this presentation, much like we'd build a house. So I'm going to give you some foundation. I'm going to try to put up some walls before I put on the roof, which is the voice. July of 1985, I received a telepathic invitation. I was not looking for anything telepathic. I was not looking for anything extraterrestrial. It just happened. The invitation had 12 words in it. The first two words were Palm Springs. Now, when I heard Palm Springs, immediately I knew my mom and dad had a home there which was vacant. They were still in Syracuse, and they were going to be transitioning to Palm Springs, and the house was furnished, but nobody was living there. 2 long blocks away, my younger sister, and her family had a home. So when I hear Palm Springs, I'm thinking one of those 2 homes. The next thing I hear is 20th October, come alone. Well, that was my reaction. Raise your hand if you heard this and you'd come alone. I don't see a single hand.
One.
Where's the one?
In the back.
Oh, you are a brave soul. The next thing I hear, you will create a landing base. This is off the charts. If I told anybody this is 1985, they would have thought I was nuts. First, just hearing a telepathic voice, they might think you're nuts. But the message. So I started talking to my friends. And I had a brotherhood. I never had a brother, but I had a brotherhood of very, very close spiritual friends. I've been really blessed throughout my life. So I started sharing this with them. And I said, and they're saying, well, are you going to come alone? And I said, I don't think I can do that. And they said, well, can we go? So the date was set. This is July. The date was set 90 days hence for October 20th. So I had 90 days to think about it or back out of it or whatever. So I was concerned. I was scared. I wasn't going to come alone. So in those 90 days, events, strange, crazy events happened that even for you who might believe that extraterrestrials exist, you're going to have a hard time believing what I'm going to tell you. This is why I've kept quiet for 40 years. When I was 9 years old, after that experience, I swore to myself, if anything like this would ever happen again, I want witnesses. If my story is nothing else other than the witnesses, you don't have to listen to what I'm telling you. Listen to the witnesses. You'll believe what I'm telling you. A voice started initiating communication with me. The first voice that I heard was the invitation. That's not the voice that I'm talking about in the book. That was just a telepathic extraterrestrial invitation to come out and witness their presence, witness their technology. There is another voice. I started seeing UFOs quickly, immediately. And I'd see them at a distance and then closer. And I would see them as close as over the house, a block or two away from me, ultimately across the street. I started talking to the kids in the neighborhood because they saw that I had all these UFOs now, these books that I was collecting, trying to find out more about extraterrestrials and UFOs, and I'm reading all these books, and these kids, these are 9-year-old kids. And they said, well, can we look at some of these books? And there was one, I can't remember the name of the book, but it had great pictorials of these UFOs. Supposedly actual pictures of these UFOs, close images. And these kids were just excited because they said that they wanted to see UFOs. And I said, well, I had seen them in our neighborhood. And they said, well, can we see them? And I said, well, the way that you're going to want to see them is you're not going to want to go out there and argue on the lawn and have anger in your heart. You got to go over, sit down. I was, in my own way, kind of guiding them into a place of meditation, to sit on the lawn, sit quietly, and look at the sky, and just welcome them. So the kids run out, 5 kids run out of my house, and they go down the street, sit on their lawn, and they're meditating. I'm in making a salad. Broad afternoon, maybe noon. I'm literally starting my salad as they left. I had not yet finished cutting up the items in my salad, and they're knocking at the door. They're here. They're here. I said, I'm thinking, that's just not possible. Oops, that was my first axiom. All things are possible. So they dragged me down the street to the front lawn, turned me around and said, look, there were 5 stars in the sky. They looked like Jupiter or Venus, which you've seen at night, the brightest stars, or the brightest planets, and they were moving. And then they would stop. And then one would do a zigzag, and the kids would scream. So this was the first event in the neighborhood. One of the spiritual brothers of mine, he was an audiologist and very, very close friend in our group, among our whole group. So he came over one night late, I don't know, maybe 10 o'clock at night, and we're just talking, and we're walking, and the street that I lived on, that my home was on, was a very quiet street. It was almost like a dead-end street, although it wasn't, but it was very, very seldom trafficked. So we're walking shoulder and arm down the street, completely dark, very few clouds, beautiful sky with the stars, and we're just talking. And I stopped, and I said, Sid, they're coming. And he said, how do you know that? I said, I can't explain how I know it. I just know it. I said, just stand here. They're going to come from the south. We weren't there a minute or two. I believe it was 14 ships in V formation flew right over our head. These are all UFOs. Clear as a bell, a few hundred feet up above us, right over us. He was stunned, to say the least. And again, he said, "How did you know this?" And I could not answer the question. I said, I just knew. The third event in my neighborhood. I would love to use her full name, and this is being filmed, and maybe this will go on YouTube and more of the public will see this, and maybe Kendra, who knew me back in the day, Kendra L., was same situation with Sid. It was now about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I walk her to her car, and we're standing, it's pitch black, there's nobody on the street. There's no cars. Like I say, we're on a very quiet street. So at this hour, there's literally nobody driving. And I walk her to her car. And as I'm getting to her car, I said, "Kendra, stop. They're coming." Same as Sid. She said, "How do you know?" I said, "I don't know how I know. Stand here." I said, "They're going to come from the south to the north." And it was about 3 minutes. And she said, "Richard, I'm so exhausted. I got to go home." I said, No. Please, just stay here." 2 more minutes, nothing. And she said, "All right, Richard, I'm sorry. I've got to go." She opens the car door to get in. 13 ships come from the south, just like Sid. Right over our head. Now, I say 13 ships. It's hard to count these. They're not moving very fast, but you're looking and you're trying to count, but they're in motion. So it could have been 14 ships, could have been 12, could have been 15 ships. But I said, "Kendra, I want you to do me a favor." I didn't do this with Sid. I should have. But I said, "I want you to come back in my house and I want you to draw exactly what you saw. Just in your mind, try to pull it all up and put it down on paper." This is exactly what she put down. She signed it, dated it with her signature. And I'm saying now, Kendra L., if you see this film, you know how to reach me because all that information is going to be at the end of this presentation. So that was Kendra. Fourth neighborhood event. I'm driving home after work. I'd seen patients all day. The sun had just set, so it's dusk. And I'm driving up, again, my very quiet road. And in front of my car, I can only describe it maybe as a laser beam came down, didn't hit my car, but came from the sky and hit the road right in front of me. Sure as hell got my attention. And I look up and I see the ships up again. So I drive home 2 blocks, park my car, I go across the street and I knock on doors. And I get some of the kids to knock on doors on their side of the street and continue knocking. And I go knocking on doors on my side of the street for people to come out and be witnesses. I didn't want to be the one person to say this happened because this is just crazy. What I'm going to tell you, I've never heard anybody in any UFO story ever reveal. So as we are now all assembling, there might be 20 of us neighbors, including the kids. These ships are diving over our houses. This is like a Spielberg production. I don't know how they didn't hit each other. They're just coming low, and they're just crisscrossing, and the movement was just, I tell you, I've never heard anybody reveal anything close to this. So I have another dinner date with a gal named Kendra. excuse me, Kathy. Let's see if we can pull this up. So Kathy drives up the street, and the same thing that happened to me happened to her with the laser beam in front of her car hit the road. She drives up and she says, "What in the hell is going on?" And I said, "This is crazy, but wonderful." I said, "You're a witness to all of this." And she said, "Well, are we still going to dinner?" I said, "I don't think so." I said, I don't know how long this is going to go on, but I am here. She was pissed. So I said, "Look, do me a favor. Come in the house. I want you to draw what you're seeing outside, just like Kendra. Kathy G. Kathy G, if you see this film or this video on YouTube, contact me, and we are going to go public with this just like Kendra. Together, you will be more of the witnesses." Now, this picture that she drew, I could not have drawn it any better because this is about third grade level. Where you see like the big, fumes, two fumes coming out of one craft, those aren't fumes. That's the motion. She was drawing, showing that the craft was raising up into the air. You'll see a ship way up on the top that was spinning, and this is one of the big ships. This was bigger than any other craft. The other craft were, 25 to 40 feet diameter, steel hull kind of things, the typical UFO you would see. This one was different. It was entirely different. It had bearings and gyrations on the craft. It was not a smooth surface. So that's what she was kind of drawing. And you'll see over on the right side, she just kind of sketches a circle. Then she shows a red line that's showing that at an angle. As I told you, these are flying at different angles. It's just chaos. So this was her image. And I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. She drew 8 ships on that. So we're not going to dinner. What does she do? She gets back in her car and leaves. While this is going on. So the neighbors are still out there. They're still gawking, and there's still activity in the sky. And I'm figuring this is going to make national news. I mean, some event like this, with this kind of activity that we're all witnessing in the sky, so I figure it's going to be on TV tomorrow. So Pam is observing all of this as the craft now assemble into a circle well above our street and our houses. And they're just very slowly, just going in rotation. And Pam says, "These have got to be helicopters." I said, "Pam, these are not helicopters. When have you ever seen anything like this that's a helicopter?" She said, "I am going back in the house to finish making dinner." She goes back in the house, and we're all still gawking at the sky and these events. Maybe she was in the house for 1 or 2 minutes, and we hear this horrific scream. If I could capture that scream for you, it would have been the scream that I made when I was 9 years old and realized it wasn't my mom or dad carrying me. I'm telling you, this was a horrific scream. She is running out of her house. The main door was open, but the screen door was closed. She flew through the screen door, almost hit the railing, turned, and ran up to us and into the arms of her husband. She was panicked. And we said, what happened? She said, "Something pushed me out of the house, kept pushing me out of the house." And I said, "Pam, because they want you to witness this." She was speechless, absolutely speechless, and terrified. This impacted her in ways that I did not know until decades later when I went back to the neighborhood and I found that house where Johnny had lived. And he was one of the boys that wanted to get pictures of the UFOs and witness this for himself. And he got his little gang of 3 or 4 other kids to experience that other event I just described. She has no memory of the event. I interviewed Johnny 20 years later and sat in their home with Johnny and his mom. And I recalled for her the moment that she had been so terrorized. She says, "Richard, I have no memory of it." And Johnny said, "See, Mom, I told you that happened." This is all part of our belief system. Things that happen that are outside of what we think must be true, even though we witness it, is sometimes just not comprehensible. So we are nearing 90 days now. All these different events are happening. More events are described in my book in quite some detail. The voice has been speaking to me during the process of all these ships appearing and disappearing and doing crazy things. Is this voice an extraterrestrial voice, or is this a divine voice? If you read my story, I'm going to let you be the decider on that. One of the spiritual brothers who was very, very involved in the extraterrestrial presence, his name is Christopher Balazich, very close friend of mine. If you go on the Oracle Books website, and if you got, I don't have the card here, but if you got that flyer, a cardboard flyer, when you came in, if you didn't get one, there's one up here. It's got the my book website. On that website, you'll see a few videos. These are real names, real people. Christopher is as much a brother as a blood brother. Anushka is her real name, is a best-selling author in South Africa. And they also did a feature film on one of her first books. Her first book was required reading in high school. She is a prolific, brilliant writer. You'll see her as one of my witnesses. She was there the night of the Palm Springs event. So was Christopher. So I said to Christopher, a few weeks before the event, I said, we're getting close to the event, but they never give me a time. They said 20th of October. And I assumed Palm Springs meant my parents' house because it was empty. So I'd be in my parents' house on October 20th, but what hour? So he said, all right, let me ask. So he and his group of 5 had their own extraterrestrial contact and telepathic contact with, I assumed at the time, a different species or a different group. So he went and asked that group what time for my meeting. And they told him 2 a.m. So the Palm Springs event unfolds. There are ultimately 2 events that happen. Come alone. I couldn't do it. There were 16 of us. Now remember, my baby sister's house is 2 blocks away. I'm in the main house at my mom and dad's. My mom and dad are in Syracuse, New York, having no idea that any of this is happening. And there are other names of people of the 16, much like me, not wanting to talk about this for 40 years, they still don't want to talk about it. And because they have their career at stake, and they're still actively involved in their career, and
this would not be a this would not be something to help their career. So we have lights and candles dimmed. The candles are lit. A couple candles around the living room, and there's in my mom and dad's house. I'm only going to talk about 6 of us. Like I say, there were far more than 6 of us. But in my story, I don't talk about, in the book, I don't talk about anybody else. So it's maybe a few minutes before 2 a.m., maybe 10 minutes before 2 a.m. And everybody who had been talking in small groups, maybe 2 here, 3 here, and 2 over here, and it's like everybody stopped talking. And we had just kind of, it felt like we kind of lost track of the time. And one of the guests comes over to me while everybody, it looks like, has been put to sleep. There are only 2 women and myself awake. So just the 3 of us go to the patio door. We slide the door open, and the pool is out there, and there's a nice lawn, and we walk out. And in the sky, what we witness is the most spectacular mothership you have ever seen. If you would ask Steven Spielberg to put together an image of a mothership, this is what he would have done. It was maybe, you can't quote me on this because I'm no good on dimensions and distances. It could have been a quarter mile away, maybe 1,500 feet. It was so illuminated. It was like, did you ever come by a house where every light in the house is on and you can see illumination from within? You know what I'm talking about, that kind of picture? That's what this was, and it had stalagmites and stalactites of light that shot up into the air and shot down below it. It was just something like you had never seen in your life. And in front of it, not very far away from it, was a red dot. And I assumed it was another ship separate from the mothership. And they just sailed slowly across the sky exactly at 2 a.m. So we are just gawking at this. And I said to the gal on my right, what do you see? And she said, well, it looks to me like a crystal chandelier floating. And I said, it looks to me like the crown of a king, just floating across. That circular motion, like you've seen golden crowns with, I'm talking about just, whew. We were just gawking. By the time, and this whole thing maybe lasted, couldn't have been more than a minute, maybe. If it was, it wasn't by much more than a minute, just to traverse the sky. By the time these 2 craft had reached the left, almost out of sight, these people in that living room, one after the other, started coming out. It was like they had been awakened. It was like they had been put asleep, and now they had been awakened. And one by one, they come out, and they say, oh, we missed it. So only 3 of us actually saw the mothership. And the beautiful lady on my right has since passed away. The beautiful lady on my left is still alive. And I asked her if she would be willing to go public. And she said, I'm not ready. So at some future point, at least, I hope that I'd have a second witness to the mothership. So moving from that event to the next event in the same house, some people had left. The second event was, I was in the kitchen, and my niece Anushka and I were talking. We were the only ones at that time awake. And we decided we'd go out in the backyard by the pool again. And we slide the glass door open. We walk out, and there is this gigantic elliptical cloud, maybe 3 miles long, sitting up in the sky, and around the periphery of the entire elliptical cloud was what looked like dry ice vapor, and it would come down and dissipate and disappear. We're just, again, like the mothership, we are just standing there looking at this thing, and we both simultaneously said, "Mothership." The mothership's up there. So Christopher was still there and awake, and a friend of his, who I mentioned in the story, David, was also there and awake, came out, and they witnessed this. And I called my sister at her house 2 blocks away. I said, "You got to go outside, look in the sky, tell me what you see." And there were already people in her house that went outside, and they said, "We've never seen anything like it. It's the strangest cloud we've ever seen." There was a glow also in the cloud. She was describing that the cloud exceeded beyond her house, and it had exceeded far beyond my house. Now this was, look at the picture here, this was a waning moon. So there was good light in the sky. So the cloud was really quite beautifully illuminated from the moon as well as from something inside of it. So, pardon me?
Sound? Did it make a sound?
No, well, yes. The night of the mothership, the first event that night, there was a hum. And I can go into, and I talk about this in the book. Not everybody could hear the hum, but several of us could hear the hum. And the strange thing is, after the hum stopped, maybe 20 minutes, and nobody heard the hum, my friend, Dr. Dion Swyhovic, that's his real name, he was one of the witnesses, and I mention him in the book. He was sitting by the pool with another friend, a gal friend, actually the gal that was on my right, who said that looked like a floating chandelier. They held hands, and when they held hands, they could hear the hum. Funny you asked that. And when they broke their grip, the hum was gone. And there's a lot you can go into about what that means, but we haven't got time. So one of the really important events in this whole process, this went on for a couple of years, three to 4 years. Joe became a witness. Joe became a witness to multiple events. I had a patient that came in. He was an internationally known pastor. He had had blocked hearing for weeks and weeks, and finally said, "I gotta get this tested and find out what's going on." As he's driving over to my clinic, his ears cleared up 100%. So he was wondering if he should just turn around, but he had an appointment. He was an honorable man. So he kept his appointment. And he tells me this story. And I said, "Well, you're a pastor. I've got some questions for you. Do you believe in God?" And he said, "No. How could you ask a pastor that question, right?" So we got into this whole discussion about the divine and God and the voice. And when our session was over, he said, "I want you to walk me to my car." So I walked to his car. He reaches in his car, gets out a book, and turns around to me, and he says, "Have you ever read the Bible?" I said, "Yes, the Old and the New Testament." He said, "What'd you think?" I said, well, I read it as a scientist. He said, yeah, I thought so. And he hands me the New Testament written in 4 versions. I said, Pastor Jack, I have that already. He said, Richard, I'm going to inscribe something for you. And he did. He gave me his Bible. He wrote, to my brother. I had just met him. To my brother. And in that Bible, he had already signed his name, so if anyone took it, they knew it was his Bible. And in blue ink, in green ink, he wrote me the message, to my brother Richard. And his name was already signed in, I think, blue ink, and his message to me was green ink. So I got thinking, all these experiences that I'm having, could I find any of these in the Bible? So this is the mid-1980s. So I'm thinking there might not even be a software program on this because we're just getting into computer technology back in the 1980s. So I asked my secretary to see if she could find something, and she did. She found a software program with word search capability. So I could plug in words or a couple words about my experiences and see what I could find in the Old and New Testament. So I grabbed that and I started putting a lot of attention. I can't even tell you how many hours. Whew. All these experiences, the voice, the cloud, extraterrestrial, or beings of light, all of these terms and phrases I was putting in. This is this is going to be tough to get you to share this with you. I put in the word clouds or cloud. New Testament, 1 Thessalonians came up on the computer. Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. This was like right to the heart. Here's another one. I put in voice, New Testament, Acts 9:7, and the men who journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no one. Back in April of this year, a dear friend of ours, who we've known for decades, she wanted to find a medium. She searches and she finds Sandra Ingham in England. And she was supposed to have a 1-hour session, paid for a 1-hour session. And it went on for like 2.5 hours. And during that time, or by the end of that session, Sally, we'll call her Sally, had said to Sandra, you and Richard have to talk. So while I'm talking to Sandra, she says, does no eyes to see and no ears to hear mean something to you? I said, Sandra, you just read part of a line that was in my download when I came off of Mount Tamalpais. This is part of the message that was delivered to me as I was descending Mount Tamalpais. The eyes through which you see the world shall grow blind to the illusions around you, such that using God's eyes you see only truth, even at a glance. Soon you will need no eyes to see, no ears to hear. In the silence of the moment you shall become one with God. This is the great cosmic secret, the great cosmic gift, for he embraces each of us in this same personal way, his way. There is no other way. Is Win free in the group? I don't know. Did Win make it here? Ah, Win is in the back.
He's in the back.
All right, I'm going to show you something here. Win Free is well known as the co-author of this book, The Reincarnation of Edgar Cayce. I'm going to tell you about the materialization event. When Sally was talking in another meeting with Sandra. Sandra said, there's going to be materialization of coins for you. Be aware of it. One night, a couple days later, she's in bed with her husband, and in the palm of her hand is a quarter. She turns the light on, and she sees it, and the date on it, and the whole idea of a quarter, the combination of the two, almost bowled her over. I don't want to go into her experience, but she knew exactly what that meant. So she calls me and she says, "Can you believe that this happened?" I said, this is incredible, to experience a materialization. I said, I had a book once that I thought materialized, but you have the real proof of it. So one day, the co-author of this book, who's sitting back there, Winfrey and I are out to lunch. And I'm taking him back to his house. And as he gets out of my car, he opens the door, puts his legs out the car, turns around to thank me. And when I look at where he had just had his feet on my black mat, there's a quarter. And I said, "Win, I think you dropped a quarter." He said, "No, I didn't. He's got long khaki pants, and you guys that know khaki pants, these are long, deep pockets." He said, "It's your quarter." I said, "Well, I didn't drop a quarter." He said, "Well, it's not mine." He shut the door, and I drove off, and I'm driving home, and I'm looking at that quarter, and I'm thinking, wait a minute. So I get home, grab the quarter, go in the house, and look at it. It's 1995, and it's a shiny quarter. And I'm thinking 30 years later, it's still a shiny quarter. That's unusual. I wonder where this has been. So I'm linking this now to the possibility that this could be a materialization. So I called Joe, and I said, I can't quite figure out, like Sally, what was 1995 if this was a materialization? And what did she say?
It's when our daughter was born.
1995, our daughter was born. So it was a spectacular and meaningful year. So now that quarter and that date meant a lot to me. So I was wondering, but is this really a materialization? So I get online, I email Sandra, and here is her email. "I believe the quarters are a gift, Richard, and there will be a third. Do let me know when it appears." Can you read it? Perhaps Joe is next.
So in my bedroom, I have a couch where I sit to watch TV. And this particular evening, I had already gotten in my pajamas. I don't have any pockets in my pajamas. and I fluffed out the throw that I usually put over my legs because I keep my room like it's a polar bear. And I'm watching TV, and then it's time to take the little dogs out, and I get up, and there's a dime.
I am Sandy Ingham of the UK. Recalling a conversation I had with Sally and talking about materialization and what we can do actually with energy, which of course everything is energy, and how you can manipulate that energy. Having that discussion with her, we discussed materialization and how coins are a favorite to materialize, dematerialize, materialize. And she said she'd love to have that experience. So, rolling on a little and waking next morning, she found herself clutching something in her hand. On opening the hand, there was a coin. There was no possible way that she could have picked up the coin, and anyway, it was a special coin. Discussing that herself with Richard, who I came to speak to and regard now as a dear friend, the very same thing happened to him, though not in the hand, as with Sally, but dropping in the footwell of his car, again a special coin. Not stopping there, I believe the next day the same thing happened to Joe. The world is not only far more than we realise, but so is our ability to connect and react with it. The world is a magical place.
I love this woman. I just met her this year and we've become very good friends. I'd like to open the floor to any questions. I know we're running close to out of time, but let us get some questions.
We are, but this has been magnificent. So I have the mic and I will run. More comments from the floor, questions? Just raise your hand, I'll see you. Very good.
So, did you ever see any sort of media coverage about what was going on in the neighborhood?
Not a single item.
Does that make you think that it may have been a psychic phenomenon that was only available to certain people in the neighborhood, or was there a cover-up, or what do you think?
You have to go back to the mentality of what was happening socially at that time. There were teachers in my neighborhood. They did not want their name associated with this. If you got your name associated with some of these events, it could impact your credibility and your career. So my assumption was that nobody took it to the media because they were too scared.
Were you in that camp?
100%. I was a working scientist. I was directing human studies research at the VA hospital. The same thing that happened to John Mack would have happened to me. My career would have been over.
Thanks. And if I could ask another question, you did not follow the part of the voice that said to come alone. Do you think if you had been alone, it might have gone differently that night? Something else might have happened?
Yes. Well, now we're going to get into speculation. And for the MUFON presentation here, I wanted to stay to the hardest facts I could so we can speculate on a whole variety of things. One of them is that I believe that that some of the extraordinary technology that you've seen, like chips, that you can put a terabyte on something smaller than your fingernail, where does that come from? So come alone. I think this has happened many times around our planet to give technology to scientists that are willing to accept it and incorporate it into their career.
Fascinating.
Okay, do we have more comments from the floor? I think you've left them speechless, Richard.
Have you ever been hypnotized and learned that you were abducted?
I didn't do it. I had a colleague do it.
Well, in that session, I don't believe I've ever been abducted. I've never had missing time. I've had direct contact in the presence of them who are very much human like you and I are, which I describe in the book. But in the hypnotic session, as the session was going on with a double PhD psychologist, skilled, in the room, I said, "They're here." And when I said that, you heard on the tape. And then at the end, I said, "They're leaving." That clap only happened twice, each time when I said that. It so freaked him out that when the second clap happened, he said, "Okay, the session's over." So maybe that answers your question.
So there was some missing time there between the claps.
Oh,
No?
no missing time, no.
Okay.
No.
Thank
I
you
never
very
never experienced missing time.
That you know of.
Well, that I know of.
Thank you.
What is your most recent encounter? I don't need that.
My most recent encounter was May of last year. Let me see. And you can go to my website and you can see it. Can you see that up there? Yeah. You're not. I have a video of it. It's one of those things. 13 ships will appear. 14 ships will appear. Just wait and go out. So this time I had my iPhone, and this is May of last year, and I got go outdoors, turn on your phone. Something's coming. So I walk out of my house, take a left, go in the back, and before I even have my phone on video, this is coming across the sky. It's about 3 feet long, and what looks like white wings is the actual ship. It's more like I don't even know what to call it. It looked like it was plastic. I was about 100 feet away, going about at least 100 miles an hour, maybe 150, I don't know. But there's an energy field around it. You can see an electromagnetic field. Understand that the white part, some people looked at that and said, well, I see wings. And I explained, those aren't wings, that's the ship. That's the craft. And I don't think anybody was in it. I think it was just a remote of some sort, but going really fast. And then I scrubbed it on my iPhone. And when you scrub it, you get a much better view of it there. You'll see the energy field around it, just like on the USS Nimitz. So on that craft, on the Tic Tac, you see the energy field around it. Same thing here.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to end. We've got one more comment in the front, and then if you'd like to make one more comment, but then I'm going to turn the mic over to Melinda, and then we'll call it a day. Thank you.
So you mentioned, this has all been great. Thank you. You mentioned earlier that you believe there are people all over the world that are experiencing similar things that you're experiencing, but yet in your book, I'm assuming that things you've shared today are in your book, The Voice.
The things what?
In the book, The Voice, the things you've shared today.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So do you feel that you're being guided to disclose this at this point in time?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I am guided to disclose this after 40 years because of events that are about to unfold. Mention is the most critical part of my story because it's beyond extraterrestrial. It
Yes.
is divine intervention.
Love it. Thank you so much.